Welcome to another episode of Miami Cop Talk. I'm here with my partner, Robert Asencio. We're filming out of Community News headquarters, our partner, and we have Tommy from Mainland Marlins producing the show. Thank you, Tommy. And we have a great guest with us today. His name is Michael D'Angelo. He is the founder of Secure Direction Consulting. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Raul. Great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about what you do, your background. I know you have some law enforcement credentials you want to share, and you look like a tough guy. So
thank you. I think
a little bit like Ernest Hemingway.
Is that the look? Yeah. That's the retirement look I'm going for. The contest in Key West. Yeah. Well, I'm sure what got me to Miami Cop Talk is 23 years in law enforcement. I was with the city of South Miami, where we happen to be sitting right now, for 23 years, my entire career. I retired in 2010, went into the private sector, crossed over to the dark side with Baptist Health South Florida and their corporate security department for a few years. And then I got the insane idea to go out on my own and start my own consulting practice, which I've been doing successfully for the last few years now.
Go ahead, Robert.
Yes. So, Mike, we worked together when we were working on duty, right? We worked together. We worked gangs. We worked a number of details. As a matter of fact, we went to training together, middle level management, was it? And we went to SPI together. So we spent a little bit of time together. And I think when we talk about Cops Cop, I think of Mike. But Mike, we wanted to bring you on to speak about this wave that's going on right now. The amount of mass casualty shootings that have just blown up all over the county. What can you tell us as to what are your thoughts on the causes, and more importantly, how do we prevent this war from continue to expand?
You know, I think an excellent point was the three of us were talking before we came on air, and you were making the analogy that these are the type of things people expect to see on the news coming out of New York City or Southern California or Chicago, or places that were infamous for high homicide rates and gun violence. I think we've taken that spotlight for sure. We're now the epicenter of gun violence. The whole nation's looking at us. Every morning on the national news, you see Miami as the headline, the greater Miami area. And I think we just went through a 4-day span with gun violence continuous every single day in a 24-hour period. Sometimes we had multiple incidents around the county. And I know the subject's almost been beaten to death, especially from a political perspective of what are the causes, what are going to be realistic solutions. And we discussed the gamut of things in the community recently, but it's clear that there's become a gun culture and a culture of violence in South Florida that we've never seen before. And it's all stemming from just an acceptance that this is part of a way of life of when you live in a metropolitan community of this nature. We seem to get to a point where we accept gang activity, we accept high rates of crime, and it's all part and parcel of living in a large metropolitan community. And that's an attitude that I think both law enforcement and the community need to decide is just not the case at all.
Well, hey, Mike, you're a smart guy. I saw some of your work. I went on your website. You can go ahead and give us your contact information so our viewers and our listeners can look you up. But you have published works. I know you have something like from police transitioning to security. Sure. So there is a transition. I know that the county now has initiated this summer heat operation. We just met with the new president of Day Chiefs, and they're going to change their tactics in dealing with some of what's going on with the violence in South Florida. But from your experience, when you're transitioning from one aspect to another, what are the key components that really make a difference?
I think a recognition that you're going into just a very diverse, separate industry of its own. That even though there's a certain connection between law enforcement and the private security sector, that there's a whole new realm out there in that part of the industry. And I think, unfortunately, things like this gun violence that we're experiencing right now is the common denominator that bring the two disciplines together and have to talk. The local government is throwing the dollars at the fire, as they always do, and they need to do, of course, without fail right now. But there's just only so much we know public law enforcement can possibly do. And there's a larger, more capable workforce out there in the private sector that needs to be engaged and brought into the equation as well.
I'm happy you said that because, they keep using the term throughout, media. It takes a village. Law enforcement alone can't do this. it takes all aspects of our society, of our community, private sector as well.
Yeah, man. So let's talk about the investigation, right, of what happened. Well, first of all, let's cover the recent shootings that started, I believe, Thursday of last week. And there was a Memorial Day weekend, so we had a vehicle that drives by the casino, a subject sitting on the door, outside the door, firing what looked to be a long gun, multiple rounds firing quickly, rapidly. Then we were followed by a couple of shootings, but also the one, I believe, Sunday morning, the early hours of Sunday morning in Hialeah at the concert hall, the banquet hall that they were holding a concert inside. 24 people shot.
Yep.
As of today, 3 people died. I want to talk about what happened next. That, the subjects quickly fired over 100 rounds. They got back in the car. They fled. Car turned out to be stolen. Car is dumped in the waterway. Let's talk about the DNA and the investigation. Can these subjects be found based on the trace evidence that's left behind?
I think the banquet hall shooting is the most significant because it just come across as the most appalling to the general public. I mean, we saw 3 subjects jump out of that car, approach a crowd that was there for festivities of this concert or this premiere of a music issue, and just the audacity to jump in that crowd in front of the public and open fire indiscriminately. Sure, there's talk that there's a targeted shooting underneath all that of 2 gang groups or rival groups that were clashing. But the fact that there were so many innocent victims that weren't part of that rival gang affiliation that were gunned down, the shock of that incident alone is enough to get the community's attention. And then we see that we're not dealing with amateurs. The car was stolen, I think it was about 2 weeks before the incident. They ditched the car in a nearby waterway in hopes of at least delaying apprehension. We spoke about earlier that the car was only in the water for about 24 hours. It was a brand new car, a relatively new car. We know with today's technology and vehicles, the virtual black box that exists inside of cars now, you can't ditch the car like you used to in the old days and think you got rid of any trace of your DNA and fingerprints, so to speak. That car is still going to be a very valuable piece of evidence. They'll be able to extract stuff from that car that will possibly lead to apprehension. Certainly will help seal the case once they get to an apprehension. But it's not like you got rid of this car, you ditched it in the canal, and now you're off and running. It was nothing more than a temporary delay, if you will, in the apprehension.
Yeah, bad guys tend to get their training from TV, which is not a good place to get your training from. And our state prisons are full of individuals that think they're going to get away with stuff. These individuals will be caught, they will be prosecuted. Unfortunately, there's members of our community that know what happened, saw what happened. Some of the individuals know who these individuals are. That's why we say, see something, say something. I like, a little hashtag stop the stupid. Let's help stop the stupid.
Excellent.
And let's start, doing the right thing. The Spike Lee slogan, let's start to live it a little bit and do the right thing. Totally inappropriate, horrible. And I appreciate you being on with your expertise and telling us a little bit about what the transition is all about. Okay.
Yeah. So we have Commissioner McGhee, Miami-Dade County Commissioner Kionne McGhee. I believe he's spearheading the county commissions or the Miami-Dade government's effort against this anti-violence program that the county's launched, at least from the Board of County Commissioners. He'll be on in a couple of minutes. He just texted me and he said he needs about 10 minutes. But Mike, let's talk about something that's seldom talked about, right? So we have these 4 or 5 shootings that occurred leading from Thursday to Monday night, I believe, the last one, mass shooting that occurred. But the reality is that there's, on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, there's a number of shootings in Dade County or throughout our community that are continuing to escalate. You mentioned about workforce. Is that really the reason why these shootings, this amount of violence is occurring, that people don't have jobs, or that there's more to this? Can you shed some light on that?
I think, and I've always thought it runs a lot deeper than that. The 3 of us know this from our personal experience. There are unfortunately some communities within the greater Miami area that this level of gun violence is just an accepted fact. You hear about an incident on the news of a drive-by shooting or an active shooter incident in a particular community, and it's just, well, that's how that neighborhood is. It's always been that way. We expect to hear the violence there. So it doesn't become sort of the hot button topic until it escalates to the point of a shooting taking place in a community that we might not be so used to hearing that kind of violence in. But it shouldn't be acceptable in any of the 30 plus communities in Miami-Dade County. It shouldn't be that we've just grown accustomed to hearing about, well, that's a violent neighborhood. We expect this kind of thing to go on. Law enforcement's used to it. Neither law enforcement nor the community should become used to that level of gun violence in any of our communities in Miami-Dade County.
I agree. We become desensitized to evil. And that's a bad place to be when you become desensitized to evil. And unfortunately, there's some people, some communities, some circumstances that may desensitize you to evil acts, but you got to search deep down inside and realize that it is unacceptable and do the right thing. And, and make that phone call. I say, call Crime Stoppers, 305-471-TIPS if you have any information. Let's bring individuals that do this kind of stuff to justice. It's inappropriate. Mike, I want to ask you a question. Throughout your years in law enforcement, based on what you've seen recently, what can you remember through history that rivals what we're seeing now?
I can think we've seen levels of violence that we could equate back to right after the Mariel boat lift and incidents of that were, widespread incidents that occurred because of mass amount of people, many with criminal records, coming into the community. But even then, it was isolated to a specific reason. We're not really seeing a rhyme or reason to the increase in the gun violence now that equates to anything we used to deal with in the past. It's sporadic. It's all over different communities within Miami-Dade County. There doesn't seem to be rhyme or reason. It's not, even though this most recent one seems to have some gang connection, there isn't always that connection existing. And sometimes it transcends one community to another. I honestly can't think in my law enforcement career of a time and an era that came anywhere close to this in level of both frequency and how far reaching it is throughout the county.
We've all been shot at it, and we know what it is to be under fire. But here's something to think about. There's been a call across the country for police reform. Some people say that police should not be militarized in any way whatsoever. But think about this. You saw, especially with this one incident, which was caught on tape, played out in the news, number of different angles. You had 3 subjects where the mass shooting occurred in Hialeah. So you had 3 subjects get out of a car in less than a minute, fired over 100 rounds. Think about that. We don't know if those subjects are juveniles or adults. They were in a stolen car. It was premeditated. It was planned. You saw that they ditched the car. But what I want you to consider is when those subjects are identified and the police are tasked with going after those subjects, will the public be behind them if those subjects wind up shooting or causing the officer to shoot and kill them? What will our prosecutors do? What will our community do? How will they react? If those subjects committed a crime, the heinous crime that they committed, and they shot at innocent people indiscriminately, as you pointed out, what will they do to you if you stand in the way as a civilian? So that is a question that our community will be facing in a relatively, hopefully, short period of time, because I hope that these animals are taken off the street, because there's no place in society for anybody that's going to kill people the way that these people did.
I have a question for you, Mike. I don't want to put you on the spot. I tend to be a little bit radical Raul here, but I think a lot of what our politicians have said throughout the past year or so on both sides of the aisle have affected the way we do our law enforcement profession, the way police officers are practicing their trade. There is a phenomenon called depolicing out there, and I can understand it. It's not that I support it, but I understand it. How much of that do you think is affecting the bad guys that are saying, hey, you know what? We got leverage here. Let's go out, take advantage of this situation where the police are being slammed left and right for being the bad guys. And that's why you see a lot of back to blue. That's why you see we have the back to blue flag, because we support our law enforcement on this show. We're Miami Cop Talk. We support law enforcement, safety first. What do you think about?
There's no doubt that the need for police reform has existed for quite some time now, and we've seen some just absolutely horrific incidents unfold in the media. There's no cause for that in professional law enforcement, and there's absolutely no place for individuals like that working in the career of law enforcement. But ironically, I think I understand and sympathize with the call for defund the police and where that pain comes from. But the irony is the real solution is the exact opposite. It's increase the funding to law enforcement.
Appropriate funding.
Appropriate funding.
Training.
I see that in two places, training and the background processing. We need to be screening on a lot more stricter basis who we allow into this sacred profession. We need to make sure we have the individual that's psychologically sound to make those decisions between life and death. And we need to put training paramount in police budgets to ensure that we have the best, highest trained law enforcement officers on the street. And the root cause of all that, as we've all known for many times, is that the salary has always been far lower than it needs to be to truly recruit and attract a professional that comes in with the level of integrity of the individual that needs to be practicing law enforcement. I think if we've increased the training levels, we have a much stricter background and screening process in place in our law enforcement agencies, and we're ensuring that we're bringing in individuals of the highest integrity, these things will start to simmer down. And the community has good cause to scream for defunding police. I understand where that pain comes from, because there's been individuals in this profession that have come to light that the three of us wouldn't shake hands with for 1 minute. And that needs to come to an end. But unfortunately, the answer is the exact opposite of defunding law enforcement. It's give them the resources to recruit the best, train the best, and put the most professional police officer out on the street.
And ensure that they have the highest standards possible, because I can tell you that the problem often comes, the breach of the public trust, the catastrophes that we often see in the news, played out in the news, bad cops, generally stems from low standards, right? Often agencies get caught up in the meeting the demand of a tight budget, putting officers on the street, ensuring minimum staffing, if there is such a rule within those agencies. But at the end of the day, what that does is that reduces the quality of professionalism that this service should be providing the community. Look, I think we've all investigated officers, the three of us that are on this panel here, but we also recognize that we need to put things in context. We need to make sure the public understands what it is law enforcement does and what it is that they're encountering. Because, as the commissioner, hopefully he'll come on and he's going to stream in a couple of minutes here, would say, we have a war on our streets.
Yep,
and how do we stop the war before it gets to the point where people just simply don't want to come to South Florida, tourists, but more importantly, people living in South Florida stop being victimized. So what about training? What do you think about training? And let's talk about specific training that the agencies can focus on in order to professionalize law enforcement and deal with incidents like this appropriately.
I heard a great analogy not too long ago that you're not allowed to practice law unless you have a certain level of training and education and you meet a certain level of strict standards and codes. You should not be able to practice law enforcement either if you don't have a certain level of training and pass strict codes. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to enhance the overall training from the beginning, from the onset of a law enforcement officer's career and throughout the career. The three of us are used to the minimum mandatory that you have to go to every few years just to maintain your state certification. Many officers do nothing more than what they need to do to maintain their credentials. That doesn't cut it. We've come a long way since the foundations of community-oriented policing. Some concepts from COP have been proven not to be as effective as they were once thought, but the model there about involving the community in the root of the law enforcement mission was key, and that still needs to be looked at. I remember an old saying that community involvement helps prevent crime. Community involvement helps prevent crime and also apprehend those that have already committed crime. Right. So the key that Raul, that you were bringing up, is the community's got to get involved. I know there's fear and apprehension about making that call because of retaliation. And when you see that level of violence, you understand that fear and apprehension. But there are not enough law enforcement officers out there to do this. All the training in the world can't multiply the numbers. Even the most highly trained cop can only do so much without the community's involvement. It's going to only be a limit to their effectiveness. But I think that level of training needs to be something that involves both the community and law enforcement to learn to work together, and not so much the client and the service provider, but maybe more of a common denominator in how they work together as a team. I know that sounds maybe a little fluffy and optimistic, but there's no way this community of Miami-Dade County can be policed from the outside. It has to be policed from the inside out.
I agree. And, part of what I do in my personal life is I'm involved in nonprofits, and I think the community does need to get involved. Let's get some kids off the street and involved in community activities and events and programs. And we have to change our mindset. Training is very important. I do a training called the faith factor. Why do you believe what you believe? And some people believe that, like you mentioned earlier, that this level of violence is acceptable. An eye for an eye, tit for tat. And it is unacceptable. And how do you change that mindset? Through training, through community involvement. I think you're right on the money when you say that. We need to reform what we do. If, what is the recipe for insanity, to continue to do the same thing and expect different results. So we got to do something different in law enforcement. We got to do something different with our political leaders. We got to do something different with our community. And it's a tough task. Hopefully this summer heat initiative, the summer heat operation is going to address some of those issues, and we'll be able to talk to some of our political leaders about that.
Yeah. There's something that we spoke with the Miami-Dade County Public Schools chief of the police department for them, Edwin Opus, and he was sharing with us that his agency is putting his officers through extensive training when it comes to de-escalation, implicit bias training. But I would suspect that, there has to be a strong emphasis on, the tactical side to create a balance. And I know that for many people, this is an unnatural act, right? How do you carry the badge with all the privileges that it brings? The fact that if somebody violates law, you can take the most precious freedom or most precious right that they have, their freedom, away from them. And how do you make sure that those police officers act appropriately pretty much 100% of the time? Because there's no room for error. It's really interesting, and we should have more conversations with the local chiefs of police about their agencies and what they are encountering and how they're moving forward in reforming their agencies to really meet the complex demands of the community's policing needs. I've got Commissioner McGhee on. Let me tell him that we're still on. So why don't you take it away, Raul?
Yeah, and there are a lot of organizations out there, CFA, CALIA, standards. You brought up hiring consultants like yourself to train these agencies in better policing practices. Can you give us your information again, Mike, and where can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out to you?
Sure, absolutely. The website is www.securedirection.net. My email address is michael@securedirection.net. I'd be happy to talk to anyone in the community at any time about the topic.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you being on the show. And as we move forward, Robert, do we have the commissioner on board?
No, I think what we're going to do is we're going to have to bring him in on the next round right here in the next couple of minutes, because he's trying to log in and he's having technology. We'll always have problems with technology.
Training.
So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and sign off right now and then bring him on for a separate show. Michael, I can't thank you for being here.
Thank you both for having me.
Thank you.
Look forward to having you more on Miami Cop Talk. For those of you that are just tuning in, visit us on MiamiCopTalk.com. We're on podcast, most major platforms that carry podcast. We're on the web. We're on YouTube. Visit us, drop us a line, but more important, to get involved and be part of this process as we move out this show and we move it forward. Thank you all.